Just a few years ago, Gina Loudon was a young, impressionable college student on her way to becoming the pride of her progressive college professors. Late one night, away from the supervision of the college faculty, in a freak accident she was exposed to an overdose of common sense conservatism. Since then, she has spent every waking moment unlearning everything she was programmed to believe during her college indoctrination. Join her in her re-education. This is the Dr. Gina Show.
You're coming into my house?
So y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife.
Go get a real job.
Three-letter word, jobs, J-O-B-S.
The president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen.
They don't get a pass because they're young and stupid.
16 ounces is the maximum that they would be able to serve in one cup. If you want to order 2 cups at the same time, that's fine. It's your choice.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Where do they come up with this stuff?
This is the Dr. Gina Show.
I was in Jefferson City speaking at the Rally for Common Sense, and I was meeting with the prosecutor there in Jefferson City, who's a friend of mine, going from way back in the day. And he says, can I bring a guy that took a bullet for me? It's not every day. You get someone asking if they could bring a guy that took a bullet for him. I'm like, well, how do I say no to that? So he brings him and his wife. And it was wonderful to meet him. And I got to talk with him over delicious lasagna that I ate mostly off of other people's plates, as I think someone pointed out yesterday. That's how I roll. The calories don't count that way. And you don't have to pay the bill. It's awesome. And so anyway, my next guest is the owner of Blitz Firearms and Concealed Carry Training. He's a gunfight survivor with an amazing story of survival from right in the heartland, right in my hometown of Jefferson City, Missouri. Welcome to the Dr. Gina Show, Justin Schneiders. How are you?
Doing well, Gina. Thanks for having me on.
It's honestly an honor and a pleasure. Your story is one that I think when most people hear it, they'll think, I wouldn't have been able to do what he did. Start at the beginning, realizing we only have a 10-minute segment, but start at the beginning and tell us, as quick an encapsulation as you possibly can, Justin, what was going on that night.
We usually have a group of guys that gets together on Tuesday night, just kind of have a guys' night, and we were sitting around inside the building. There's some guys outside, and Brian and I, the prosecutor, decided that we probably better go out and join the other guys, and I went outside just ahead of Brian, and just about as soon as we stepped through the door, a guy walked up with a hooded sweatshirt and black jeans and a scarf covering everything but his eyes. And we asked him, could we help you? And it was a nasty rainy October night, so the clothing wasn't completely out of whack. But he looked down and noticed that he was carrying a revolver, and that was obviously a bad thing. He pointed the gun at us, said, this is a robbery. I want everybody to drop what you have in your hands and go inside. And everything that you hear about being moved to a secondary location, first of all, is true. You never want to go to a secondary location. At that point, we didn't think that we had much choice. There was enough of us there. There's 7 of us total, that we didn't think that all 7 of us could take off running, and we didn't exactly have time to sit and discuss it either. So we allowed ourselves to be taken inside the building into a conference room, laid face down on the floor under his instructions, stacked head to feet and side by side between the conference table and the wall. He instructed us to take out our wallets, any kind of jewelry and stuff, and he was distracted just for a second while he was getting one of the guys up off the floor to carry the bag around. The guy was very organized, first of all. He acted, I kept telling the detectives afterwards, this guy knew what he was doing. And it turns out later on we found out he did know exactly what he was doing. This wasn't his first time.
Yeah.
But while he was distracted for just a second, instead of taking out my wallet like he had instructed, I pulled my gun out instead. But given the circumstances where I was laying head to feet and in the middle of several other guys, I didn't want to start a gunfight with a bunch of people all around me and endangering their lives. So I figured, okay, while he's taking wallets and jewelry off somebody else, I'll go ahead and take advantage of him being distracted again. And in the meantime, when he had looked back over at us and I kind of stuffed the firearm underneath my chest, hiding it. The place where my plan went wrong was he decided to come back to me first to get my wallet, and obviously I had been busy getting my gun out instead, and so I didn't have my wallet out. He pulled up my coat and my shirt to get to my wallet, and instead he found my empty holster.
So then he knew. Yeah. Then you were in a world of trouble. So tell us what happened next.
He started demanding the gun, and I told him I didn't have it on me, that it was out in the truck, and he didn't believe me. So he ended up grabbing me he was standing at about my right hip while I was face down on the floor, reached down with his left hand, grabbed the back of my coat, and started pulling me up, told me to get up. And as I did, I slid my hands underneath my chest like I was pushing myself up off the floor. And I grabbed my pistol, started turning into him to shoot him. And just as I started turning into him, he stuck his revolver into my coat and tried to shoot me in the stomach. Luckily, he was at the wrong angle. That round ended up skipping off my stomach, but went through my left hand, and off my stomach, through my coat, through my left hand, shattering the base of my thumb on my left hand. Kept turning into him to shoot him back. He fired again. That next round ended up going through my right hand ring finger knuckle, and ended up destroying or shattering the ring finger and pinky finger bones in the back of my hand before coming out the top of my wrist. He ended up backing around the table, giving me his profile and firing at me. I fired twice, but unfortunately both of those missed, and my hands were just a little bit not up to snuff at that point. So pulled the trigger a third time, and nothing happened. Ended up dropping down behind the table, cleared the gun, saw that I had ejected a live round, saw my hands at that point, and kind of realized what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
But I got back up, got back into the fight, got 2 more shots off while he was still firing at me, and both of those ended up scoring well enough to where they were able to follow the blood trail eventually to find him. Evidently, at some point between the clearing the gun and scoring my 2 hits on him, he evidently hit me a 4th time, which ended up going right above my left pec muscle and right above my left lung, and exiting out between my arm and my back.
And so at this point, you have hands that are both bleeding and shot, and one is shattered. One is pretty well. I mean, your thumb took it pretty well too. I mean, it was at least broken. And then you've got another wound to the abdomen. You've got another wound to the chest. So that's 4 wounds total that you have. And how many does he have at this point?
2. I never, until after he went to the hospital, after they found him, he got the information as to how badly he had been hit. All I knew at that point was that he was gone. The only thing that ended that fight was him running out of ammunition. It was when he was standing at the door and I was getting my last 2 shots off on him. He pulled the trigger 3 times on that revolver and went click, 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 and those 3 clicks were louder than all the gunshots that had been fired, which I had 4 and he had 5 shots fired.
Okay, and so ultimately, tell us. I need you to just sort of encapsulate this for us, because I want to get to the end, because I want to ask you what your best advice is for folks who are confronted with that, and what you might have done differently. Tell us where he is, what ultimately happened, and ultimately, really, how you survived this.
First of all, where he is now, he is in prison for 75 years. We found out he was convicted of first-degree armed robbery, first-degree assault, felon in possession of firearm, and armed criminal action. And the judge decided to run the sentences consecutively. And because of his prior criminal behavior and the fact that he had only been out of prison for 2 weeks when he decided to attack us. So he violated his parole on top of it, which means that he's not eligible for parole until he's served, I believe, 85% of his sentence. So it was in the 60-some years before he's even eligible for parole. As far as what I would do different, I've been asked it a lot of times, and the thing about that I learned about gunfights is everybody has this perfect picture of what their gunfight would be if they had to defend themselves, and it's never going to be like that. They are so dynamic. Every little thing can change the whole outcome.
Yeah.
One of my primary concerns was that I didn't want anybody else to get hurt. That it was my decision to defend myself and my friends, and I would have a hard time living with one of them being injured or killed. So I had that running through the back of my mind the entire time. So even though I've been told by some people, oh, I would have drawn right away, I would have taken this opportunity, they weren't there. They didn't understand that that would have endangered my friend.
Oh, you're kidding. People said that to you? That's so rude.
Yeah.
You don't armchair quarterback a gunfight, okay? Wow.
It's been done.
Oh, wow. So ultimately,
overall,
yeah?
Moving while I was shooting would have been very advantageous. Using the table for cover a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that I haven't had any law enforcement training. I haven't been in the military. I had not up to that point had any formal gun training. So, which also goes to show that the average person out there that chooses to defend themselves, they go out and practice and they set up some defensive type scenarios. They can effectively defend themselves. I certainly recommend formal gun training, not necessarily just from me, but there are a lot of really good high profile and even medium profile gun instructors all across the country that people get information from and learn tactics and stuff that just may save their lives.
Well, I think that's really important. If you hadn't had a gun, let's say you were in a so-called gun-free zone, or let's say you lived in a state like California where you can't have a gun with you, how many people would be dead today from that day?
At least 5 of us out of 7.
At least 5 of you. Well,
he had 5 rounds. We don't know if he had extra rounds in his pocket or anything else. But we honestly believe that he would have systematically gone down the line of us and shot us in the back of the head.
Sobering. Justin Schneiders, you are a real bona fide hero. You just don't meet those every day. Thank you so much for being on the show. I want to have you back sometime just to talk about this a little bit more in detail. But thank you for saving the lives of my friend. And it was great to meet you in Jefferson City. Hope to see you next time I'm there. Coming up, we know JFK wasn't an extreme progressive like today's Democrat.
Hi, this is Joe Dan Gorman of Intellectual Frog Legs. Ain't no liberals say I have every phobia out there. They say I'm a homophobe, an Islamophobe, even a Michelle Obamophobe. Well, actually, I am kind of scared of her. So, with all these fruitcake phobias, I'm bound to be on my last leg. So you probably ought to hurry on over to intellectualfroglegs.com. See what Chuck Woolery's calling the best new media he's seen. That's intellectualfroglegs.com.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best T-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com. docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was founded over 35 years ago. Gun Owners of America is here for only 2 reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. Gun Owners of America has been called the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Join today at gunowners.org.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
You're a troublemaker, troublemaker. You ain't nothing but a troublemaker, girl.
This is Andrew Breitbart of Breitbart.com and Big Government. Troublemaker, just like my longtime friend, Dr. Gina, Tea Party Patriot. You're listening to The Dr. Gina Show.
We may think we are protected because you're a pretty good shot. Pretty good shot at the range. That might not matter at all when you are actually presented with a confrontation, as my next guest, James Barnhart, says. He's a former contract bodyguard and small arms tactics instructor for businesses and families. He has actual gunfight experience, which he will tell us about, lectures on the psychological and physiological aspects of training for armed confrontation. If you have a gun, you need to know what he has to say. Welcome back to the Dr. Gina Show, one of our favorites, James Barnhart.
Dr. Gina, thank you so much for having me back. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, first I want you to tell us about your experience and what led you to be so passionate about the issue of confronting these psychological and physiological aspects during confrontation.
My story started in 1995. I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and I had just been discharged from the Navy, and I was starting a career in fugitive recovery and executive protection. And as it just so happened, I returned from the grocery store one day, and I was armed because I always went armed because I never knew what kind of a confrontation who I was going to run into. But these two individuals decided that they were going to try to rob me in my driveway. And when I stepped out of my truck, they began firing at me. And so I had to engage them both. And the entire interaction took about 15 seconds, but in 15 seconds, they got off 3 shots, and I got off 15 shots, and hitting the driver 7 times and the passenger 3 times. And that really opened my eyes. I'd had some introductory training. I'd had military training. I was involved in law enforcement on the base, and I also had training from my mentor, Russ Carmine, who got me into the fugitive recovery and the executive protection. So I had a framework, but what I realized that night was the physiological aspects of this encounter was very different than when we were kicking in house doors on a crack house or something like that, because we were caught by surprise. And so there wasn't that buildup. There wasn't that psychological preparation. It was on in a matter of milliseconds, and it was over in a matter of seconds. And that started me down the path of really exploring the psychological aspects of armed self-defense training.
So what happens physiologically to someone when they are faced with a really unforeseen confrontation and they are armed?
It's situational dependent on how much time you have leading up, or your cognition of what is getting ready to take place. If it's instantaneous, you totally go from a part of the brain called the amygdala, which I've talked about before, and it's a fight or flight response. If you have nothing in your repertoire, chances are you're going to hesitate, sometimes up to several seconds, and you could hesitate long enough that you actually seem to freeze in place, and you're at the mercy of the attacker. Now, if you have something in your repertoire where you've trained, that amygdala is going to pull that out, and instead of a flinch or a freeze reaction, you can instantly, well, if you've practiced for it, if you've trained for it, you can initiate a counterattack much more quickly and much more efficiency, with much more efficiency. And this is paramount because until you do that, you are reacting to your attacker, and they are in control, and you're always a step behind. So once you can force them into reacting to you, then you can start gaining on them, and you can start outpacing their decision-making process, which is called the OODA loop. And that puts you in better control, or at least disrupts their thought process and their plans long enough that will cause them to miss because of accuracy issues, and give you that little bit of time you need to engage them or to seek an egress route to get out of the situation.
So, because we all hear the stories, though, about, some little 12-year-old girl and burglars are coming in her house and she uses her pink gun to stop them. So some people obviously have this fight or flight, the fight, in their repertoire, as you're saying, and they haven't trained for it. But tell us about the cases you're talking about, where people who have trained extensively still opt for that flight option when confronted. I think you told me once there was police that this happens to quite often. That shocked me.
Yeah, it depends on the training program. You can have what's called training scars introduced into somebody's psychological response based on the training, how their training is set up. Because you're going to react in reality exactly how you train, because that's what your amygdala pulls up. That's what you revert to. So there's cases of police officers who, on the range officer would have them draw, fire 2 shots, and reholster. And then when confronted in an actual scenario, they would draw, fire, and reholster. Well, anyone who's been in actual gunfights know that 2 shots sometimes may not be enough. You may not even hit the attacker with 2 shots. They can continue on for sometimes several minutes before they go into shock from blood loss or whatever, and they're fully functional. So the training has to be based on reality. It has to be based on psychological facts and physiological facts. Feel-good training, or the approach of you're going to scare them by firing warning shots like our vice president suggested, is simply not based in fact, and it's not based in actual experience. People tend to want to create their own idea of how these things go down, and when you look back at history, especially if you look at the older, the ancient, like the Roman armies, as long as their attack wasn't disrupted, as long as they were the aggressor and the opposing army was reacting to their actions, they could cut the opposing army down fairly easily. And it's the same thing when you have an active shooter, whether they're engaging one person or they're engaging multiple people. If you cannot cause them to start to react to you, if they maintain control and they are the aggressor with control of the scenario, they have a much better advantage. And if you're not training to cause that to happen, then you're simply training to produce a weapon, and that may not be enough if you don't know how to actually fight with that weapon. You have to be able to move. You have to be able to change the plane of the shooting field. If you're standing and they're coming at you, you may need to sidestep. You may need to go to a kneeling position simply to cause them to have to react and change their aim. That might be the split second you need to get the advantage and put them down.
Dr. Pete Blair studied this, Director of Research for University's Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center. And there's an article about it, Blaze, and it said that about 1/3 of the time an armed citizen can really make all the difference, because essentially, I think you said on my show originally to me, police are really cleanup crews. I think we like to think that police are going to come in the midst of an attack, but it doesn't happen very often. One of the most striking parts of the research findings came when Dr. Blair and his associates studied survival rates at Virginia Tech. And interestingly, of course, this is an anniversary of that horrible situation. But while in 2 classrooms, students and teachers tried to hide or play dead after the killers entered the room, most of the individuals were ultimately killed by hiding or playing dead. So that doesn't always work. And warning shots, as you said, as Obama suggested, don't always work. How do you know, though, what works in what situation? Are there simple cues that you can have in your head that you can memorize that'll say, this is what I'm going to do if I'm confronted?
Well, it's situational dependent for sure. And a good quote I like to use from the founder of SEAL Team 6, Richard Marcinko, is any action is better than inaction, and sometimes not acting is the boldest action of all. That has various meanings. But if you're in an active shooter situation, certainly if you're just going to hide or play dead, you're not doing anything to change their approach. You're not doing anything to change their plan.
So, wait, let's back up, because I really want to get this for listeners. So if the person is actively engaged in shooting, hiding or playing dead is probably not your answer, because they've already demonstrated that they have the gun, are willing to use it, and are using it.
Yeah, they've already committed, and all you're doing is providing a stationary target. That's all you're doing, or you're playing hide and seek, and then it becomes a challenge. It becomes more fun for them to track you down and then shoot you. The only way that you can really make an effective difference in this situation is if you put them on the defensive. If you cause their awareness of their own immortality to become a factor in their decision making. If they become self-aware that they are now in a survival situation, you're going to cause confusion, you're going to cause their thought process, you're totally going to cause their plans to go out the window, because they planned on coming in and dominating like they were walking through a video game and shooting people at will. But now the video game has come alive, come into their living room, and has put a cold, hard fact in front of them that, hey, if you continue, you're probably going to die right now. That is what it takes. Richard Wrangham wrote in his book Demonic Males, when studying the great apes, that even the chimps, when they would go on raiding parties against opposing clans, if they were numerically out inferior, or if they felt like they were in a situation that was not going to be something that they could survive or come out of unscathed, even the apes would back off because they realized this is a bad situation. We may not survive this. And that's documented well throughout the species. And any time that, unless you're dealing with an out-and-out sociopath, if you can make that person believe that they are now getting ready to become dead, that is a huge psychological impact on their actions, and you're going to cause them to hesitate. Anything you can do to stop their plan of action, anything you can do to stop the violence of action, is going to give you the chance to make them react to you, and that gives you the upper hand. Whether it's throwing desks, whether it's throwing chairs, whether it's running down the hallway as fast as you can, or everybody coming at them at once, anything that can disrupt their plan of action is going to be beneficial. Now, if you're armed, all the more better, because now you can cause them to not be able to regain their ability to attack. You can confuse them, stop them, disrupt them, and then you can fire on them and cause them to be incapacitated and not be able to carry out a further attack.
Okay, so ultimately, you're saying that for those who do wish to carry guns, they need specialized training to get it through to their amygdala part of their brain that they need to fight and how to fight, or they could lose a fight and get themselves killed, or worse, get themselves and everyone they're trying to defend killed. But not everybody lives in the same town as you, where I know you do this training. Where can people find these sorts of training courses? And just let us know, what is the best way that people can go find these training courses and get familiar with this? Because we're not talking about target practice here, and I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah, it's about movement, and it's about learning how to move with a weapon, learning how to move with a handgun or a rifle or a shotgun, depending on your situation. Movement is the key. You can do more with movement to disrupt the attacker than anything else, because that forces them to have to change aim, have to change direction, and it messes up their plans. I'm involved with a group called Pulse O2DA, or PulseFirearmsTraining.com, and we offer that kind of training. We offer it to businesses, large churches. We offer it to school administrators of private schools who choose to train their faculty and staff. There are several other good instructors all around the country that you can go to that offer this kind of training. You can also join groups such as USPSA, United States Practical Shooting Association, or IDPA, International Defensive Pistol Association. Now, these don't necessarily teach you to gunfight, but what they do is get you comfortable with moving and shooting at the same time. And you have to couple that with good gunfight training, not just moving training where you're engaging targets, but actual gunfight training. NRA courses, there's some good courses. Your basic CCW or your basic pistol course is not going to get you into this. You have to seek the advanced training with the advanced instructors, preferably somebody who's got actual gunfight experience. Now, this is going to cost you a little bit more, but it's just like with motorcycle helmets. If you've got a $10 head, you only buy a $10 helmet. But if you want to really protect yourself, you're going to spend a few $100s for a quality helmet that's going to give you protection. The same applies to firearms training when it comes to gunfight training, not basic firearm safety and basic accuracy skills, but actual gunfight training is what you got to seek out.
All right, and where can folks find you?
I'm on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at defcon_pulse, and you can email me at jbarnhart72@gmail.com, and you can also contact us through pulsefirearmstraining.com.
pulsefirearmstraining.com. James Barnhart, we just appreciate not just you being on the show and telling us about this, but what you do in your everyday life. It is so important, and God only knows how many lives will ultimately be saved from the work that you do every day. Thank you so much for being on the show and for all you do.
Dr. Gina, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure.
All right, my friends.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best T-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com. docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Would you rather be a gun owner or a victim? Hi, I'm Tim Macy from Gun Owners of America. Our Constitution affirms our right to self-defense, including the right to own firearms. Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who'd like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was formed over 35 years ago. We're here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. I urge you to join us in this fight. We've been called the only no-compromise pro-gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Please go to gunowners.org and join today. It may help you from becoming a victim tomorrow. That's gunowners.org.
Hey, it's Dr. Gina here, and I told you that I'm going to help you be the most effective in your activism that I possibly can, and I've got a tip for you right now. Go to gunowners.org and join to be a member. Sign up for their alerts, and you can know exactly what you need to do to take action to save your freedoms. Go there right now and become a member. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. Tell them Dr. Gina sent you. Gunowners.org.
One thing I want to talk about. Chris Christie's come out and said the social issues have got to be put on the back burner. And this is the pipe dream, really, of Karl Rove and the rest of them who really want the social issues gone from the party. And I really believe that at this point in time, we have turned into not a nation of parties, Republican, Democrat, not even a nation of perspectives, conservative, liberal, progressive, otherwise. I really think we've turned into a nation of we the people versus they the elite. I really believe that those on the right side of the aisle are probably in some ways about the same when it all shakes out to those on the left side of the aisle. I think it's more about maintaining wealth and power and less and their own personal privileges. And I think it's less about really being concerned about answering to the people who elected them, who, by the way, they work for. And that would be you. So I'm excited because coming up next we have Maggie Gallagher on the show, and she is going to discuss some of these issues with us. But first, I want to talk to you about how they are trying to eradicate. Basically, this is what they're going to do. They're going to tell us as the election comes closer and closer. They're going to begin this mantra, these slogans again of how we need to attract moderates into the GOP, and the left is going to help the GOP propagate this message as well. And they're going to talk about how our best hope. If you're a conservative, your best hope to elect a president who believes what you believe is to abandon all the issues of your faith. Well, you've seen Marco Rubio self-destruct, and ever so recently, you're watching Ken Cuccinelli pay a price for his truce strategy on the issue of abortion, in my personal opinion. That is also the opinion of my next guest, Maggie Gallagher. We're going to talk to her in a moment. But Ken Cuccinelli is having a troubled campaign in Virginia, and that's because when he was asked about the war on women, he basically retreated on the subject and said he's not going to use the political capital of the governor's office to be moving these pieces of legislation. He says his focus is to look at job creation and job growth. But conservatives heard that loudly and clearly. He doesn't want to appear to care about the issue enough to govern on it. Now, some say this is a smart strategy. Some say that Cuccinelli, if he avoids this issue, at least he won't become Todd Akin, where a national campaign will take him down for his views on abortion. But those of us who understand common sense and basic human rights feel differently. You don't even have to base a lot of these issues, these truths that are so self-evident, on faith issues. While our faith is so under attack, and while Christianity is the #1 thing attacked these days, we feel defensive and we feel like we have to put our faith out there all the time. And while I think we do to discuss these issues, that doesn't have to be part of necessarily a faith argument, because you can make these arguments just based on self-evident truth. And then when you're talking about loving someone, do that in your faith. When you're talking about reaching out to someone, do that in your faith. Make sure that your faith leads on those things. But when you talk about issues, make sure that you can talk about them from an educated perspective, without just relying on, well, it's in the Bible says so. Because if you're talking to somebody that doesn't believe in the Bible, you're not going to help them believe in the Bible by telling them because the Bible says so. At least that's my personal opinion. I've seen people approach it differently and do very, very well. But I think one of the things we need to do is stay true to the issues that make our platform strong. I believe if we abandon our platform and the basic planks within our platform that unite and motivate conservatives, I believe we're in a world of trouble at that point. So this is what they'll say. They'll start looking for the moderate candidate. And they'll start telling you, well, we need to reach out to Hispanics. Translation for that, pass amnesty. They'll say we need to focus on someone who is seasoned and presidential. This means, of course, that they must wear a tailored suit and give allegiance to the elitist consultants and GOP leadership inside of Washington, D.C. They'll say we need to focus on fiscal issues. Translation, raise the debt, take out another credit card, raise the debt ceiling, and continue to print money in answer to all of our problems and pass the bill on to our children and grandchildren. They'll say we need to avoid the social issues. Translation, avoid basic constitutional issues like Second Amendment rights, rights to life, rights to free speech, marriage, and taxpayer funding for abortion and contraceptives. The list goes on. They'll say we need to reject the radical fringe. Translation, make pariahs of the Tea Party and any other patriot groups who hold quote-unquote extreme positions in support of things like balancing our budget, ooh, so extreme, and not laying more debt on our children, again, so extreme. The problem is they're wrong on every count, my friends, and they know it. This messaging has nothing to do with electability and everything to do with the preservation of the elite and their own wealth and power. This pattern of inserting their candidate that they can control, the one who will continue to defend the status quo, has failed for us time and time again. Remember Dole, remember McCain, remember so many others lying in the dust here. They're lying about their facts, too. They're lying about the amnesty being the only way to the Hispanics' hearts. Hispanics are largely conservative and very religious, and with regard to the right to life, they oppose social welfare for illegal immigrants. But the elite want to avoid these issues and allow the other side to completely define the issues. They'll tell us that we need someone seasoned and presidential, but this is the line they used to reject Reagan, remember, in favor of Gerald Ford and George Bush 41. The elite and the GOP choose the candidate every presidential election cycle only to produce more of the same. McCain, Dole, Romney, and the list goes on. We are a center-right country. But the sad news is, and folks, this falls in our laps, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later, evangelicals vote at rates less than 50%, and evangelical women vote at rates of about 20%. My friends, my girlfriends, my sister friends out there, we have absolutely got to change this. And the way to change this is not to change the platform and is not to abandon the things that are issues of a mother's heart. Do you really think you're going to get more than 20% of evangelical women out of the church pews to vote if you take away the sanctity of life issue? Do you really think so? So explain to me again why we should listen to this mod squad and why we are better to avoid faith and life issues. So this is what is happening, and this is going to continue to happen. Cuccinelli has paid the price. I believe Chris Christie has paid the price. I remember a time when many of us liked him. And then there, of course, is the whole issue of marriage. We need to debate this issue of marriage from this perspective. This is a freedom issue. In other countries, people are killed for debating these issues. I've been asked to talk about this topic tonight, marriage, on Al Jazeera. And I tell you, it's a contrast to go from this show to Al Jazeera. But I'll tell you why I say yes. And I'm going to talk about this a little more later. Why I say yes when I'm asked to go into these realms. Because Christ said, take his message to the ends of the earth. And I don't think that means that we get to choose not talking to audiences where they might poke fun at us, where they might ridicule us, where they might send death threats. So I will be there. In other countries, especially some of those listened to quite frequently by Al Jazeera, people will be killed for debating issues that don't gel with the powerful elite in that country. I'm happy I live in a country that values freedom enough to debate these issues. When other countries aren't free to debate, and people who have feelings opposite the prevailing powers would be killed. They say that the GOP is losing touch with the American populace. Well, I ask you this, why is there only criticism on the right? I don't like Boehner or McCain any more than I like Brown or Obama, but let's be fair here. When a lot of them are advocating that boys can go into teenage girls' locker rooms, yes, they are in the state of California, if they decide they're feeling gender confused that morning, is that too much? Even for the left in this country? I think so. Many folks I know find that extreme left agenda on the side of the Democrats too much and are starting to push back at that party. So to say this is about party, it really isn't. It, again, is about we the people versus they, the elite, because there are problems on both sides of party politics. It has really become this scenario with the elite. All the hacks in Washington, D.C. do is in the name of power, money, or re-election. It's about feeding their own beasts, as you witnessed in this last election with all the sexual scandals. They pontificate on issues, they create crises, and they use those willing to enslave, and yes, I did just say enslave, and subject themselves to them to get more of their own power. All the while, the establishment elite enjoy the spoils of their sin against the very people who entrusted and elected them. This is heinous behavior, and this is who we need to be calling out when we're asked these questions. Many people in the U.S. like tradition. We like our cornerstones. Marriage is one of those. And most people, gay, straight, female, male, I don't even care, young, old, doesn't matter, rich, poor, if you ask them if they like cornerstones, if they like traditions in American culture, they're going to say yes. And most people even prefer committed relationships that are already covered and designed through natural law and through our Constitution. Most of the passion on these issues comes from people of faith, like you and me, who feel like religious freedom in the U.S. is under serious attack. You can be anything in the world, but don't be a conservative Christian anymore because you are under attack. In this country, yes. In other parts of the world, you die for it every day. Every day. And yet you have people who don't even understand that their own faith will be the next to go. And they join on that bandwagon ignorantly. The U.S. is unique to other forms of government because our Constitution is the first in history to prioritize the right of the individual, and that's what makes us different, and that's what makes us freer than any place else in the world. So debates like this one are bound to happen because there's gray area that is just difficult to define. And I think that is what has led us to a new kind of anti-label era that we're going to continue to talk about on this show. People are preferring relationships to labels. And we don't want to be manipulated in emotional ways to pass policy that is irresponsible and destructive. And that's precisely what we're going to talk about next. We have Maggie Gallagher on the show. She has been in the Lion's Den to defend traditional marriage. I've seen her go on the most leftist shows and the most leftist networks, and she's come out on top again and again, and that's why we're bringing her straight to you here on Focal Point today. Maggie Gallagher up next. Stay tuned. And one thing I want to talk
Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was founded over 35 years ago. Gun Owners of America is here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. Gun Owners of America has been called the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Join today at gunowners.org.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
Hi, this is Joe Dan Gorman of Intellectual Frog Legs. Ain't no liberals say I have every phobia out there. They say I'm a homophobe, an Islamophobe, even a Michelle Obama-phobe. Well, actually, I am kind of scared of her. So, you know, with all these fruitcake phobias, I'm bound to be on my last leg. So you probably ought to hurry on over to intellectualfroglegs.com. See what Chuck Woolery's calling the best new media he's seen. That's intellectualfroglegs.com.
This is Dick Morris. If you're diagnosed with liberalism, Dr. Gina will cure you.
And you are listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk. I'm your host today, Dr. Gina Loudon. You can learn more about me at DocGTV or find me on Facebook or Twitter. I am all over social media, and I hope you are too, because it's an important place to be if you want to have impact. Gone are the days, my friends, where we can write postcards and we can take little pieces of paper over to our neighbors and we can send paper pieces of letter. You, as conservative Christians, if that's the perspective you're coming from, and I'm trusting you are, then you need to be all over the internet, all over it. You need to have as many Facebook and Twitter pages as you can possibly manage, because every single one of us has become a citizen journalist in this culture. And there's no better way to get your message out there than social media. Maybe you have a blog. Maybe you have something you want to promote. Maybe you're the pastor of a church and you want more people to know about the great messages you're working so hard to produce every Sunday. Maybe you're a mom and you want people to know how awesome it is that God has given you the blessing of staying home with your children and raising them or homeschooling them or whatever it is you do, whatever it is you're passionate about. There's one way to get that message out, and it is no longer writing those slow postcards on paper. So I'm begging you, I'm imploring you to get out there and to get on social media. Now, we are talking a lot about how Chris Christie has said that the GOP needs to abandon the social issues, and you're watching as politician after politician does this. I've watched Marco Rubio take a position on illegal immigration and lose his base. We've watched Chris Christie do the exact same thing. Chris Christie came out strong against unions and especially some of the manipulative tactics of the unions and the way that they use government for the promotion of socialistic, anti-free market ideas that fly in the face of most things that Christians believe. We didn't like it. So we appreciated when Chris Christie came out strong and said the things he said, but he lost his base when he started abandoning the social issues. You see, in today's world, things that are solid, that you can grasp onto, are the things that people are searching for. True leadership says what they want to say because they know it is right, regardless of whether it's popular. What is the old saying? What is right is not always popular, and what is popular is not always right. But we know a leader when we see them. We know a leader when we see them. So standing strong on issues that speak to the heart of the base of what is truly a center-right country. Poll after poll proves that this country is a center-right country, and yet politicians continue to try to manipulate, to convince you that we've got to somehow say that we don't really have any standing other than we want to keep our money. Keep our money. When you really talk, and have you ever done this? I do this all the time. I go on to liberal talk shows all the time, and I ask them what really gets on their last nerve about conservatives. And do you know what they always say? They're greedy. They're greedy. They want to keep their money. And yet you have the moderate establishment in this country telling us that our message simply needs to be, we don't care about social issues. We just want to keep our money. Thank you very much. What do you think is really going to happen to us in the next election if that's our message? Well, one person who knows. She is the author of 4 books on marriage, including The Case for Marriage and her latest book, Debating Same-Sex Marriage, which is all we need to be able to do. So I want you to join me in welcoming a true warrior for truth, the founder of National Organization for Marriage, and a good friend of all of ours out there fighting for us, Maggie Gallagher. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well, and I appreciate you joining us here on Focal Point today as I fill in for Brian Fisher. There's so much going on. You've got the Chris Christie statement. I'm actually going on Al Jazeera to talk about this a little bit later. The Chris Christie statement that we just need to do away with these social issues, Maggie. And I know you don't agree with that, but tell our listeners what their message needs to be when they're approached by their let's say, less informed friends and family and coworkers, etc., on the topic of abandoning social issues.
Well, we just released a report on this called Building a Winning GOP Coalition, the American Principles in Action Project. And it really takes a hard-headed political look at this. Obviously, there's a moral question involved, too, and what really matters in American politics. But what we're really seeing is the political idiocy of the so-called truth strategy, where Republicans say they're pro-life or pro-marriage or pro-religious liberty, but they try to mute their voices and don't talk about it. And then when it comes up, they switch the subject and they downplay it. And I'll tell you, we're seeing in Ken Cuccinelli's campaign right now in Virginia exactly how badly this plays out politically.
Yes, I shared part of your article in the Washington Post. Cuccinelli pays the price for the GOP's truth strategy on abortion. I shared part of that with the audience already. But tell them where the lies are and how to call them out on this.
Where the lies are?
The lies.
Accusing of lying. I don't do that lightly, so forgive me.
No. The lies of the left on the war on women. I mean, the war on women really isn't on the right side of politics, and you explain that well in this post.
Well, the war on the women, the Democrats can do the war on women strategy because Republican candidates driven by pundits let them, because they decide what's happening right now is the Democrats understand that the secret GOP playbook is don't talk about the social issues. And so the Democrats are getting more and more extreme, accusing Republicans of being abortion extremists while they adopt these incredibly extreme positions. Terry McAuliffe has never met an abortion that he doesn't want you to pay through the tax code. And yet, when asked about abortion, Cuccinelli doesn't take that opportunity, and other candidates, I don't mean to pick on Ken, who is pro-life and who you should vote for. I'm going to vote for him anyway in Virginia on Tuesday. But, it's a really bad political strategy to simply slide away from your own core moral principles, because among other things, it makes you look shifty. Mm-hmm. It demoralizes your base. It doesn't allow you to attract other, Reagan Democrats and other ethnic people who may not share GOP economic values, but do share traditional social values.
Right.
And it allows the Democrats, your enemies, to define what it means to be pro-life, and that's probably the worst thing about it all. The Republicans don't want to talk about abortion. The Democrats know that. So they do nothing but talk about abortion, and they define the GOP as abortion extremists on our politically weakest ground. That's the dynamic that whatever you think morally, and as you know, I'm a strong voice for life, marriage, and religious liberty. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's really politically dumb to adopt it, and yet consultants are getting paid millions of dollars to advise our candidates to adopt this losing strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a huge mistake, too. What is the best argument, just for our listeners right now, because we've gotten so sort of weighted down in the minutia. I want to talk about just what is the best argument for marriage. If you had to encapsulate it into a sentence or two, can you do that?
It's really simple. Marriage is the union of husband and wife for a reason. These are the unions we all depend on to make new life and connect those children in love to their mother and father. If a union cannot do that, by definition, same-sex unions by definition cannot do that. They're not marital unions, and we don't want the government to be lying to our children about what marriage is.
And so when it comes down to the idea of freedom issues, because a lot of people like to talk about liberty today. There's a massive libertarian uprising of sorts in the youth today that I happen to have noticed. When we talk about state or federal control, what are the answers there, Maggie, especially on the issue of marriage?
Well, marriage is a government institution, so really it's not about liberty. Liberty is about the right to be left alone. It's not the right to have your relationships recognized as marriages. You can't have an individual liberty right to what a marriage is and decide that everyone else has to agree with you. And that's fundamentally, when you talk about it from a libertarian perspective, that's just a fundamental confusion. Now, the left understands that gay marriage is rooted in a marriage equality argument, which is the idea that the government should adopt a new public norm that everybody is supposed to see same-sex unions as just the same as opposite-sex unions. And if you see any differences, you're like a racist, and you should expect to be treated as such. That's really not an argument. It's about expanding individual liberty, and the libertarian wing of the Republican Party ought to recognize that.
And so when you hear the argument of equal rights, because I know you've heard that too, and you hear people say, oh, hey, all we want are equal rights. We don't want to be second-class citizens. And maybe this is your own child saying this, or someone you're very close to. How do you answer that question, Maggie?
I say that I don't think it's true. I think unions of husband and wife are special because they're the only unions that can make new life and connect children in love to their mother and father. So it is not true that all relationships are equal and they all need to be treated equally. It is true that every individual has equal rights, but none of us have the right to redefine marriage.
And also, what do you say to those who say, well, we already are married, we don't need a piece of paper to define us, and we already are married, and maybe we've adopted children or had children through surrogates. What would you do with those families if today the laws could be reversed and marriage is again between one man and one woman?
Well, there are a lot of people raising children who are not married. I personally don't approve of that, but same-sex marriage doesn't change that. It's not going to bring hardly any children under new marriages. It's a tiny fraction of all children. So the more important, what should we do with people? People have a right to raise their children unless we can demonstrate that those children are being actively hurt. So I think all parents who are raising their children should be respected and protected in law, but none of them have the right to say, well, I don't feel like being in a marriage, so now I want my relationships to be called marriages. And that's true whether you're in a same-sex union or whether you're in a legal polygamous marriage, which is, there's a lot of people in the world in legal polygamous marriages. That doesn't mean you get to have them recognized here.
All right. Well, Maggie Gallagher, thank you so much for your hard work on this front. We'll continue to follow you. Where can we find your latest piece you were talking about earlier?
It's up at you can find it at MaggieGallagher.com. That's the easiest place, probably.
MaggieGallagher.com. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Ted Cruz, and this is the Freedom Minute. Recently, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke testified before Congress about Obamacare, and he said that employers are hiring part-time workers in order to avoid the mandate. This is one instance in which Bernanke is right. In fact, U.S. employers have added far more part-time employees this year, averaging 93,000 a month, than full-time workers, which are only averaging 22,000 a month. In addition, employers are forcing employees to work 29 hours a week or less. Today, we're approaching the last best chance to stop Obamacare, which is hurting the economy, and it is a disaster for working people and their families. Single moms, people struggling to climb the economic ladder, can't make ends meet working part-time. I'm helping lead the effort to defund Obamacare, and I urge you to join us. I'm Ted Cruz, and this is the Freedom Minute.
Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was founded over 35 years ago. Gun Owners of America is here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. Gun Owners of America has been called the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Join today at gunowners.org. Just a few years ago, Gina Loudon was a young, impressionable college student on her way to becoming the pride of her progressive college professors. Late one night, away from the supervision of the college faculty, in a freak accident, she was exposed to an overdose of common-sense conservatism. Since then, she has spent every waking moment unlearning everything she was programmed to believe during her college indoctrination. Join her in her re-education. This is the Dr. Gina Show.
You're coming into my house?
So y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife.
Go get a real job.
Three-letter word. Jobs. J-O-B-S.
The president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen.
They don't get a pass because they're young and stupid.
16 ounces is the maximum that they would be able to serve in one cup. If you want to order 2 cups at the same time, that's fine. It's your choice.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Where do they come up with this stuff?
This is the Dr. Gina Show.
One of the things that I continually heard from people growing up is, well, if you're so pro-life, I started making pro-life speeches. I remember my first one in 7th grade, and I got pictures of babies forming in the womb, and I showed them to my 7th grade speech and debate class. And I remember standing there with my poster, feeling all proud. And then after I gave my speech, I remember one of the mothers from one of the other students in my class coming up to me and saying, well, as a future woman, I hope you're ashamed of what you've done to women today. Meaning giving my speech and telling the truth about when a baby's heart begins to beat, when its spinal cord is developed, those kinds of things. This seemed so simple to me. And then I met my husband in college. My husband was a Christian Scientist at the time. He's since become same faith as me. But at the time, my husband was a Christian Scientist, and he was pro-choice because many of the Christian Science rulings, I guess, are within their religion. That they kind of fall into just not taking a position on those sorts of issues, so they don't really care that much about those issues from a public policy perspective. So he was pro-choice, and as I continue to talk to him about this issue, getting pretty much nowhere, and this is before we were married, he took what was just a law class, and he had a law professor who happened to be a judge, a Supreme Court judge for the state of Missouri. Paul Spindon, I believe, was his name. I'm going back a little ways there, but I think that was his name. And he taught him how to argue it from a secular perspective. And as a secular person, really, he, at that point, accepted that there was no way that the self-evident truth was on the side of life. Since then, of course, I'm happy to tell you he had a massive conversion, and it was one of the coolest conversions ever, and that's a story for another day. But all of the while, my husband and I didn't like the argument given by his mother and others on this pro-choice side of things, my father, his mother, much of our family on the pro-choice side of things, saying, well, what will happen to all these babies? All you Christians, you've heard this, all you Christians, you want to say that everybody's got to have these babies, but then you don't want to take these babies. What's everybody going to do with these babies? Well, let me tell you something about those babies. Those babies today, because of arguments like that, are adopted at a rate of about 90%. That is, babies with Down syndrome, like my Samuel, are aborted at a rate of about, did I say adopted? I meant aborted, at a rate of about 90%. Disgraceful. Really, the eradication, it is a form of genocide, the eradication of a specific group of people, those people with Down syndrome. So the same people who will advocate for people with disabilities will advocate to abort people with disabilities. It's craziness. And of course, ACOG, the branch of the American Medical Association that advocates aborting these babies, has made this a very popular notion. Well, I loved people with Down syndrome, and I couldn't stand the fact that they were being aborted in droves, and I wanted a person with Down syndrome in my life, and every time I got pregnant, I would be like, you know, God, I'm pretty sure I'm called to be the mom of a baby with Down syndrome, so maybe this is my time. Maybe this is my baby that's going to have Down syndrome. Some people think I'm awful for saying that, but it's just, I always felt called to be the mother of a child with Down syndrome. You know what you know, okay? We all have different callings. I'm not saying everybody's called to be a parent of a child with a special need, but I was, and my husband was, and especially after his conversion, we were very convicted. And so every year on my birthday, we would make phone calls to abortion clinics. And I would say something like this: hello, my name is Gina Loudon. My husband is a senator here in the state of Missouri, so you can check me out. You can know what you want to know about me and my family and our life. And anyway, if you ever have a mother come in who's had a positive triple test and she's going to have a baby with a disability, would you let her know that I might be interested in adopting her baby? 10 years I did this. Every single year on my birthday, that's what I did. And I never had one phone call. And you see, now I figured out that Planned Parenthood is not in the business of adoption. They're not in the business of adoption. They're in the very lucrative business of abortion. Very lucrative. Never forget it. And so I didn't get the dream of having my baby with Down syndrome, but pregnancy after pregnancy, I would hope. And then I became pregnant with twins, and I was very excited about this. I hadn't told a lot of people yet, and I had miscarried these twins. And then I miscarried another single, and both of these miscarriages were particularly painful. I knew that you couldn't, I guess I didn't have the faith I should have. I'm just going to confess that. I didn't have the faith that I should have to believe that. Well, what my friend told me when I called her to tell her that I had miscarried twins, she said, and these were twin boys, by the way, and I wanted twin boys so bad I couldn't stand it. And she said, well, you know, God is going to restore what the locusts have eaten away. That's his promise to us. Coming from her had a little more gravity, perhaps, than from someone else, because her husband had just died in a plane accident the year before. And her life had been restored in absolutely miraculous ways. And so, but I'm not going to lie and say that I wasn't a little offended by the promise of a hope and a faith that I really didn't have, that God would restore what the locusts had eaten away, in the fact that I had miscarried these twin boys and then another single baby. And now I was pregnant again. And I was hemorrhaging the same way I'd hemorrhaged the 2 pregnancies prior to that. And I knew that I was probably going to miscarry this baby. So I was on total bed rest, and my phone rang. And it was one of those moments where your phone rings and you have a feeling that the phone call, have you ever had that feeling? That the phone call is going to mean something big. My husband was in a statewide campaign. He was in the governor's office that day, negotiating on his bills. And he said, and he never says this, but this day he'd said, please don't call me, honey. If you need me, call me, but let it call me 3 times in a row, and I'll know that's my signal that something is wrong, it's an emergency, and you need to talk. Well, I called him and said, we had a phone call. There's a baby who needs us. And they said he might die. We might only be adopting him to give him a set of parents and a name, but I'd really like to adopt him. And my husband's answer was awesome back to me. He said this, I'm really busy and I have to go. Call them back and tell them yes. And he said, because if this baby that needs us, if we don't have time for him, then God doesn't need me in politics, number 1. And oh, by the way, he said, congratulations.
30.
You're the mother of twins. I did have that baby boy. I did adopt that baby Samuel. And God does restore what the locusts eat away. I can promise you that.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com. docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Would you rather be a gun owner or a victim? Hi, I'm Tim Macy from Gun Owners of America. Our Constitution affirms our right to self-defense, including the right to own firearms. Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who'd like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was formed over 35 years ago. We're here for only 2 reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. I urge you to join us in this fight. We've been called the only no-compromise pro-gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Please go to gunowners.org and join today. It may help you from becoming a victim tomorrow. That's gunowners.org.
Hey, it's Dr. Gina here, and I told you that I'm going to help you be the most effective in your activism that I possibly can, and I've got a tip for you right now. Go to gunowners.org and join to be a member. Sign up for their alerts, and you can know exactly what you need to do to take action to save your freedoms. Go there right now and become a member. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. Tell them Dr. Gina sent you. Gunowners.org.
Hi, this is Mark Stein, author of After America, and even in the midst of total societal collapse, you don't want to miss the Dr. Gina Show. She's great.
Now, I've said this before. I've made some decisions in my life about the way to carry out my faith and to engage the culture war. I moved to California to be on the front lines, really, of what I see as the culture war. There's a whole point, a whole part of Don Wildman's book, I Had a Vision, God Had a Plan, of how to engage the culture war and how to fight on the front lines from wherever you are. I have a chapter in my book about that too. Go fancy that, ladies and gentlemen, trying to help you plug in. You know, I say things like, if what you do is make cookies really well, then make cookies. You know, the Bible says, whatever God gives you to do it with all your might. So if what you do well is make cookies, you know what? Representatives and senators love cookies. They do. They love cookies. Make them cookies. Take them to them. If what you do well is raise children, offer to watch the children of someone. If what you do well is business, offer in the interim to help that representative or senator in your area develop his business. Do you not think you're going to have his ear if you've helped him like that? See, it's all about relationship, and that's what I point out in my book, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that, we're all going to endure criticism. I love that saying, do you have enemies? Good. It means you stood for something once in your life. That's a Winston Churchill quote that I love, that I committed to memory because it's so important. You should be making enemies, and you should not just be making enemies that are wimpy gossips that stand behind the fence post and talk about you. You should be making enemies that are loud, that are ruthless, that are indecent, that say horrible things. Those are the kinds of enemies that Christ made, and those are the kinds of enemies we should count a badge. And I absolutely do. And so when I was asked to go, I was trying to think of the order. I think first show I ever did that was really just going into their turf was Comedy Central. I did Jon Stewart's show. And I of course was criticized from those on the right who say you give him legitimacy when you go on his show. Well, I don't know. I've seen Jon Stewart do a lot of things lately. One of the most outspoken critical people of the issue on the issue of Obamacare. So I've seen Jon Stewart take some stands that aren't traditionally leftist, and I've seen him question this administration. Kathleen Sebelius, in particular, quite hardcore. He's gone on her. So does he usually make fun of people on the right? Yes, but if you listen, he makes fun of people on the left. I will say this: his audience mostly very hardcore left. But I'm okay with that because I know what I believe. I know that the truth is self-evident. I do my homework. I make sure I'm versed on the issues. And then I cross over into enemy territory and fight on their front because that's battleground. If we're in our echo chambers, what are we really accomplishing? How are we reaching that low information voter that might be somebody that might vote for a Ronald Reagan or something like that? But how will we ever know if we're ignoring them because we're in our echo chambers? They're not reading my book. They might not read Don Wildman's book even. They might not listen to this show or my show, or they might not watch Fox News. But they will listen if you go to where they are. Where are they? Comedy shows. And they are also in reality TV. So those two places are places I've gone. What do you think? Is invading the culture substantiating the left, or is it invading them, truly taking territory? 888-589-8840. Going first to Jose, who has been a trooper and held for all this time from Hampton, North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Jose. What say you?
Thank you very much, Gina. What I want to say is, yes, continue to fight forward. Just remind of a verse, Matthew 16, verse 18. Christ says, I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I don't know if many Christians realize that this world is fallen and the gates of hell, they stand still in this world. And we are the only offensive weapon that is used by God in order to bring victory. Whether Christians decide to stay home and do absolutely nothing, they have to realize is this is the battleground. We are in the battleground. The less you get into the fight, the less you have the ability to really push to that victory across the full spectrum of this world. So you're in the fight regardless of whether you want to or you stay at home. With that being said, some of the things you brought up earlier in the episode, yes, social issues must be at the forefront of all elections. The greatest influence which we can direct our nation is our ability to discern from right and wrong. If we fail to promote those positive directions, we will cease to make a huge impact on this world. Now, while we cannot force people to make the right decisions through our representatives, we can create an environment to guide individuals to those godly decisions. And any representative, me personally, who chooses to drop those social issues or compromise on those social issues in their platform demonstrates to me the kind of heart that that individual really is, which to me is a selfish individual who only is looking to get elected, a coward unwilling to fight, and who is looking for the easy way out and lacks the integrity to hold the office that should be held to a high esteem.
Well, Jose, that's some awesome stuff right there. I feel like you did a beautiful job of encapsulating the whole show, because we started out talking about should the GOP abandon social issues, and we ended up talking about should we take on the culture, and you kind of encapsulated it all for us, Jose. Thank you so much for your call. I appreciate it. We're going now to Danny from Bentonville, Arkansas. Welcome to the show. What do you have to say?
Thank you for the privilege, Dr. Gina. I heard a lot
pleasure.
about you. First time I've ever got to listen to you.
Oh,
but
glad to have you.
Thank you. What bothers me is when we have a Sarah Palin or Ted Cruz, the ridicule, naturally from the left, but inside the Republican Party. For instance, Todd Aiken in the Missouri race and Karl Rove said not one penny. And I was wondering what you thought of his stance, the legitimate violation of a woman, if he actually meant that, or just how far can we take that? And on a lighter note, we do like humor, I do. Do you think behind every good senator there's a better woman? Thank you.
Danny, thank you so much for your call. I love those questions. I'm gonna get to the first one, the second one first, and that is there good women behind? I certainly hope so, because I think that the Bible says that man was not meant to be alone, and I certainly hope that behind all the male senators there's a good woman loving him and grounding him, because I think that's a really important part of that. But I do want to say on the Todd Aiken thing, I may be too close to this, honestly, to answer it in the way that you'd hoped I would. I actually am from Missouri. Todd and Lily Aiken are personal friends of mine. My husband served with him in the Missouri legislature, and I was on his bus traveling with Penny Nance and some of the others they're affiliated with AFA as well, who were trying to get the word out that he had so been misunderstood, dreadfully misunderstood in this whole thing. I'll tell you what Todd Aiken did wrong. What Todd Aiken did wrong was he fell to the lie that you need to hire overpaid consultants to tell you what to do. He paid one of those overpaid consultants. That overpaid consultant, who was, in my opinion, incompetent, advised him to go on air with a has-been reporter who literally faked a bomb attack, very well known in St. Louis for faking a bomb attack on camera, had been completely disregarded by the media. Todd Aiken, in going on his show, gave him total credibility again, gave him a national platform again. The whole thing was just very sad, but the mistake Todd Aiken made was going on a show with someone who had an absolute agenda to destroy him. That was not smart politics. It was not smart media. And turning your campaign over to consultants is the biggest mistake and the biggest lie inside of politics that I know of. And that's the reason I hate term limits as well. That's for a whole nother show. We don't have time for that because we have to get back to your calls. And I want to go now to Whitney from Jacksonville. I'm sorry, Whitey from Jacksonville, North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Whitey. What say you? Should we invade the culture or should we not give them legitimacy? What do you say?
Well, I don't think we should give them legitimacy, but the way I look at it is Christ didn't hang around all the good people. He hung around sinners. He hung around people that didn't know what they were doing.
Great point.
And so he was right among them. So I really think that what you're doing is the right thing to do. And second, talking about abortions earlier, with all of us Christians, the way I look at it, it looks like it is so simple, is that why don't we tell anyone that's getting an abortion that we would adopt the children? Mm-hmm. We have enough Christians out here, loving Christians, that would adopt every child that someone is trying to abort.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Whitey, because they always use the foster care system to explain that. The foster care system is very corrupt. I have written about this at WND.com. You can check it out. And the reason there are so many children in foster care has to do with the incompetence of the foster care system, much more so than a lack of available abortions. Second point on what you said, Whitey, that I think is critical. The lie of the left is that there are not Christian families out there who will adopt these children. That is absolutely untrue. I can tell you that I waited on a waiting list, an Ohio clearinghouse of more than 350 families waiting to adopt a child with special needs. I waited for 10 years on a list for a child with special needs. So that is a lie of the left, and we need to absolutely make sure we squash that lie at every turn. Whitey, I thank you so much for your call. Now, I've said this before. I've made some decisions in my life about the way to carry out my faith and to engage the culture war. I moved to California to be on the front lines, really, of what I see as the culture war. There's a whole point, a whole part of Don Wildman's book, I Had a Vision, God Had a Plan, of how to engage the culture war and how to fight on the front lines from wherever you are. I have a chapter in my book about that too. Go fancy that, ladies and gentlemen, trying to help you plug in. You know, I say things like, If what you do is make cookies really well, then make cookies. You know, the Bible says whatever God gives you to do it with all your might. So if what you do well is make cookies, you know what? Representatives and senators love cookies. They do. They love cookies. Make them cookies. Take them to them. If what you do well is raise children, offer to watch the children of someone. If what you do well is business, offer in the interim to help that representative or senator in your area develop his business. Do you not think you're going to have his ear if you've helped him like that? See, it's all about relationship, and that's what I point out in my book, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that, you know, we're all going to endure criticism. I love that saying, do you have enemies? Good. It means you stood for something once in your life. That's a Winston Churchill quote that I love, that I committed to memory because it's so important. You should be making enemies, and you should not just be making enemies that are wimpy gossips that stand behind the fence post and talk about you. You should be making enemies that are loud, that are ruthless, that are indecent, that say horrible things. Those are the kinds of enemies that Christ made, and those are the kinds of enemies we should count a badge. And I absolutely do. And so when I was asked to go, I was trying to think of the order. I think first show I ever did that was really just going into their turf was Comedy Central. I did Jon Stewart's show. And I of course was criticized from those on the right who say you give him legitimacy when you go on his show. Well, I don't know. I seen Jon Stewart do a lot of...
Hi, this is Joe Day Gorman of Intellectual Frog Legs. Ain't no liberals say I have every phobia out there. They say I'm homophobe, an Islamophobe, even a Michelle Obamophobe. Well, actually, I am kind of scared of her. So, you know, with all these fruitcake phobias, I'm bound to be on my last leg. So you probably ought to hurry on over to intellectualfroglegs.com. See what Chuck Woolery's calling the best new media he's seen. That's intellectualfroglegs.com.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com, docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was founded over 35 years ago. Gun Owners of America is here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. Gun Owners of America has been called the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Join today at gunowners.org.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
You're a troublemaker, troublemaker. You ain't nothing but a troublemaker, girl.
This is Andrew Breitbart of Breitbart.com and Big Government. Troublemaker, just like my longtime friend, Dr. Gina, Tea Party Patriot. You're listening to The Dr. Gina Show.
It has done extremely well. It's at its 1 year mark. Now he has more money than Van Camps has beans. He's good looking. He is talented. He's funny. And yet he still gets angry every time you compliment him because it's not enough for him. So without any further ado, welcome back to the Dr. Gina Show. Comedian Evan, say it. Thanks for being with us today, my friend.
And you know what? I take offense at that introduction.
Yes,
You mentioned that my book has done very well, but you didn't quite explain why it has done very well. And the reason it has done very well is because it's a great book.
Yes. Did I leave that out? You know, I just did a speaking tour, and I warned everyone about you on my speaking tour, and I told them, I kept quoting you in your adopt a liberal theory. I think it's brilliant, but I really don't want to say that out loud on this show, especially when you're listening. And so I told them, I'm like, it's brilliant. Read the book. Don't tell him. Don't tell him you read it. If you meet him, act like you've never heard of him. Act like you've never heard of his book. He's a foreign entity. And whatever you do, don't laugh at his jokes. And so I've been out there building you up, Evan. You could just know that.
I know, but here's the problem, and I run into this, and I've got a dear friend who has been a friend of mine from before I was a genius. All right, from when I was just, like every other human being. And so he's a touchstone for me. You know how they say you're never a hero in your hometown because they know who you really are?
Yes.
And I keep, and I will apologize to him because I will tell him, well, my book is now a best-selling book. Bill Whittle just said my book is perhaps the most important book I've read in the past 10 years, and I'll catch myself.
Catch the perhaps.
I hear people like you say that I come off as arrogant and conceited and whatnot, and so I'll apologize to him for sounding arrogant. And he will say to me, Evan, you're not arrogant, you're accurate. When I talked about my speech to the Heritage Foundation, it is the single most viewed lecture in their entire history. So what, Dr. Gina, tell me, help me here. What am I supposed to do? Lie to come off as humble?
I don't know the answer, Evan. I see myself as personally called into your life to try and keep you humble. I tell my kids that's why I'm here. They think I'm here to raise them or some silly stuff like that. I'm like, no, my job is to keep you humble and to make sure while the rest of the world thinks you're the greatest thing ever, that I tell you every day, there are gaps, and that's pretty much what I tell my kids. The book.
Oh, no, there's no doubt there are gaps. Oh, I never denied there are gaps. Of course there are gaps. But what makes me very, very special is my gaps are bigger than other people's gaps.
See, he doesn't stop. There's nothing you can do. Talk to us a little bit about the success of the book. The book, of course, The Kindergarten of Eden, how modern liberals think. It really is important to know how they think if we are going to battle them, isn't it? I mean, number one rule in the art of war is know your enemy.
Right, and listen, there are a million books out there. It's funny, I was at a major radio station here the other day, and just spending time waiting for my time on the air, I stumbled into a small office in the back of the room, in the back of the offices, and it was piled high with good and important books, major publishers with major names, important topics, and that was the book, that was the pile they received that day. So this is when you publish a book, this is what you're saying to somebody who may even already respect you, may even be a personal friend. Hey, read my book. Everybody's saying read my book. These are all the books that are out there. Gina, there's a reason that my book, just like the original speech, became this phenomenon, became this thing that people say is, and there's a simple reason for it. There was a question that we did not know the answer to. It is so unsatisfying to say that the reason that the leftist media, for example, lies, or my colleagues in show business make these movies that promote all the wrong values is because they're evil, or they're stupid, or they're Marxists, or they're Islamists, or they're fascists. When they're not. They're your friends, they're your neighbors, they're your colleagues. So what is the explanation for the modern liberal ignoring the facts, rejecting reason, and coming out on the wrong side of every issue? I'll give you just a couple of quick examples.
Yeah.
How is it that these people will look at the Middle East with all these Islamic fascist dictatorships surrounding this tiny democracy of Israel, and the liberal will conclude the reason there's not peace in the Middle East is because Israel is oppressing those other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's factually moronic. It's morally disgusting. And it's completely wrong. And yet, smart, good, decent people like my friends here in Hollywood will come to that conclusion. Well, the reason my book is a phenomenon, the reason my lecture is now the single most viewed lecture in the Heritage Foundation's entire history, isn't because I'm so pretty. I am. You know I am. I'm not
Lovely.
as pretty as Ben Shapiro, but pretty. Okay? And it's not because the talk was that entertaining or humorous. It wasn't. It was a wonkish talk. It's because there was this question that nobody else answered. And I answered in a way that made so much sense, was so consistent, that even people smarter than me, not that there really is anybody smarter than me, but I'm being humble, like people like Bill
Ooh,
Whittle.
it's a humble moment. Ring a bell, somebody. Go ahead.
But people like Bill Whittle, who by the way, he wouldn't lie on my behalf. He wouldn't just roll the log in my favor. Bill Whittle said this is perhaps the most important book I've read in the last 10 years. It has forever changed and clarified the way I view the world. The reason this book, like the talk before it, broke through all these other talks, very, very smart people, is one simple answer. I'm right.
And humble. And so tell me this. So today, when we're looking at adding to the debt, this $6.7 trillion for a system that is almost inevitable to collapse upon itself, meaning, of course, Obamacare. When we're looking at, no follow-up whatsoever on really tragic things in our American fiber, such as Benghazi, when we're looking at deaths of children, because we refuse to accept the truth that guns actually do save lives, and our Second Amendment is actually the most important of amendments, because without it we have no others. Tell me what's going on in the liberal brain with the newer things that have happened since your book.
Well, every single one. Listen, when I first gave that original talk in 2007, I didn't know exactly what I had, and I kept getting emails literally by the hundreds, if not thousands, over now, 7 years or 6 years, that said to me, do you know what you have there? You have the unified field theory of liberalism. And I can talk about what happened yesterday or the day before because it is the unified field theory. So let's talk about Benghazi. In my argument, the modern liberal will invariably side with evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success. They will ignore the facts and reject evidence in order to do so. Mm-hmm. The argument that the leftist media made regarding Benghazi was that this well-armed, well-coordinated, perfectly timed September 11th mass murder of our ambassador and others was not actually a coordinated Islamic fascist attack, but the result of an instantaneous response to a YouTube video that had come out 6 months earlier. It is such a ludicrous concept that a YouTube video that nobody saw that came out half a year earlier was the cause of this mass murderous attack. And yet that was what the leftist media portrayed as the truth. Mm-hmm. So are they really that stupid? No, they're not. Here's the key. They're not allowed to believe that Islam is bad. They're not allowed to believe that anything is bad. So if it was a well-coordinated, well-timed, intentional mass murder, that would make Islam bad. So they must start with the conclusion that the murderers were provoked. Then they must look for what that provocation must have been, and the best thing they could come up with was this YouTube video from 6 months ago.
Right. So
I know it's right. Of course it's right.
Well,
don't you know who you're talking to?
But this is the part I really don't understand, because they don't seem to mind at all thinking that Christians are bad.
Right, because that's the second law of the unified field theory of liberalism. The first law is they're not allowed to recognize anything as better than anything else. Okay, no culture, no religion, no form of government.
Okay.
They're not allowed to believe anything is better than anything else. Well, now they have a problem. If Islam isn't lesser than, let's say, Judaism, right? If it isn't, then how are you to explain that the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are living in squalor while the Jews have Tel Aviv, while the Jews have Philharmonic orchestras? Well, if nothing is better than anything else, then success proves injustice.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Do you have a background in psychology at all, Evan?
No, I'm just psychotic, so it's kind of
Self-study, we call that. I have extensive years of that as well. Comedian Evan Sayet, when are you going to be somewhere doing any comedy stand-up routines for anyone that we might be interested in?
I've got nothing planned. I'm celebrating the 1-year anniversary of my book, which takes place tomorrow. I'm writing. I'm enjoying. I've got nothing scheduled except private events.
Just toasting.
So go to my website. That's what I say. Go to my website and buy my book. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, that's what he has to say. And that website is Evan Sayet, S-A-Y-E-T, evansayet.com. And, of course, you can find him on Twitter at Evan Sayet. I have to say, for all of his bravado, I should just have Jason shut him down now, but for all of his bravado, the guy is actually, he puts his money, his walk where his talk is, I'll tell you that. And I've seen him come through in some situations where others would honestly be too arrogant to come through. He's a true friend to the show, and we are proud to know him, almost as proud as he is to be himself. Thanks for being on the show today, Evan, and congratulations on the 1-year anniversary of the kindergarten
And
meeting.
Dr. Gina, as much as I love myself, I love you more.
Oh, you're the best. All right.
Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was founded over 35 years ago. Gun Owners of America is here for only 2 reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. Gun Owners of America has been called the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Join today at gunowners.org.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
Hi, this is Joe Dan Gorman of Intellectual Frog Legs. Ain't no liberals say I have every phobia out there. They say I'm a homophobe, an Islamophobe, even a Michelle Obama-phobe. Well, actually, I am kind of scared of her. So, with all these fruitcake phobias, I'm bound to be on my last leg. So you probably ought to hurry on over to intellectualfroglegs.com. See what Chuck Woolery's calling the best new media he's seen. That's intellectualfroglegs.com.
This is Dick Morris. If you're diagnosed with liberalism, Dr. Gina will cure you.
He takes everyday things that happen to us in real life, like waiting tables, like wrestling in high school, things like that, and he talks about the benefit of those later in life. And so I welcome for the first time today to the Dr. Gina Show my next guest, Isaiah Henkel. Welcome to the show, Dr. Henkel.
Hi, Dr. Gina. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Now, I'm so intrigued because as my poor listeners have had to hear me talk on and on about, wrestling is something that has been a part of my whole entire life. I was a wrestling cheerleader. I married a wrestler. I believe wrestling is so... I could never verbalize why I thought wrestling was so important in life. And I want you to talk about the things, and you've got a lot of them listed out here, 120 of them to be exact, but things we can learn from wrestling that benefit us in business later. Talk about that.
Yeah, so if I had to summarize it all into kind of the top 3 things, elite sports like wrestling, and there's been a lot of scientific studies that have shown this, is that elite athletes, first, they know how to work hard. Like really hard, so they're not averse to that. 2, they're comfortable with dealing with failure, so they're not afraid of risk. In other words, so and this is something obviously if you're starting a business, you have to be willing to deal with some risk. And then finally, they're more emotionally intelligent. And again, a lot of studies. Wrestlers, specifically people that do individual sports that are very demanding, they have a higher level of emotional intelligence. They're able to kind of separate personal from professional things and not take a serious hit or a failure as an end-all, be-all.
That's interesting. And so when you're using the word emotional intelligence, just define that for the audience for a moment.
Yeah, so to be able to be sensitive to other people's emotions that might be involved in certain, transactions. If you're negotiating, for example, you have to understand if the other person is getting angry. You have to be able to sense if they're getting bored, if they're losing interest, these kind of things. So subtle variations, and also expressiveness. You got to be able to express yourself in a way that people can understand. And again, going back to sensitivity, know if they're not understanding you and kind of adjust course along the way.
Yeah, and I just love some of these. You've got a lean horse runs a long race. I mean, that just echoes back to watching, whatever guy I was dating at the moment, cutting weight and going through all that and running in a trash bag. I mean, just crazy things that they did to try to get down to what was really just the leanest, meanest fighting machine out on the mat. You say creating allies is something that's a life skill. I mean, a lot of us don't learn to really do that until later in life. Befriending your competitors. You have to shake hands at the beginning of a wrestling match. There were times where I just really wanted to kick that guy because I already knew his reputation on the mat. But
there's a lot you can learn from him. Obviously.
But there's a lot you can learn from that, exactly. And you say competition makes you a better person. Schools are eliminating competition, Doctor. And I just really want to ask you what you think about that. A lot of schools today, it's all about self-esteem. Everybody gets a trophy. How does that work out?
There was something on the news recently where if you beat another high school football team by too many points, you can actually be fined.
Oh my gosh!
State. So I think that can be harmful to kids growing up because one, I think it's really healthy to kind of have an outlet for your more kind of aggressive behaviors, and business is a good outlet for that. Sports are a great outlet for that. Where it's not aggressive where you want to hurt somebody. It's aggressive where you want to be the best you can be, and you want to push yourself to a higher level. And so I think if you get rid of competition, then you're going to get rid of people competing with themselves to be a better person overall, or to add something more valuable to other people.
Yeah, I don't want to see the guy that just got the trophy for showing up. I don't want to see him in the boardroom. I really don't ever want to see that. Some of these you put might surprise people. Here's one that I found particularly attractive. Smell blood. Tell us about that one.
How did I know you're gonna pick that one? Yeah, so like I say with that one, on the wrestling mat or a football field, if people don't know what wrestling is, if you face a weaker opponent, some people will, because they're weaker, they'll take it easy on them. And I think that doesn't benefit either person. And then there's another type of person where they'll see a weaker opponent and they'll want to crush them completely. And I think that's actually a healthier way to do it because think about if you're on the other end of that equation. You don't want people to take it easy on you or to show charity. You want them to give you your best so you can get better. Like the reason that I was able to, the thing that got me to be a better wrestler faster than anything else was throwing myself in the mix with people that were much better than I was. And I kind of had to step up to their game, so to speak. And so I think that in life, if you want to continue to get better, you have to surround yourself with better people. And taking it easy on the people that are trying to step up to be at your level, you're not doing them any good.
You crack me up because you even go down to the nitty-gritty here. You say everyone remembers a cool name. That is so true. I can still remember wrestlers' names from high school who had cool names, and you never forgot them. You mentioned two of them. You say from Iowa, of course, Iowa University, Mark Ironside and Mike Big Rig.
Big Rig was he was at Navy.
Yeah.
So I wrestled in Pennsylvania, and so every time I heard that name, I was like, why not me? Why can't I have that name? But it's really true. And, of course, obviously in business, you remember cool names. I mean, you said you like Cheeky Scientist. That didn't just happen. You try to key in on these things that people are going to identify with and things that are going to be catchy, no matter what you do. I mean, Dr. Gina, that's also catchy, right? So
I don't know. I don't think it's quite as catchy as Cheeky Scientist. I really like that. Another one, you didn't say, everything's not all about blood and guts and gore, and this isn't all about just smelling blood and then taking advantage of your weaker opponent, but you said things like this, and I love this because I've always believed that the more gentle the man, the stronger he probably is. Politeness is a sign of toughness. Where is that happening on the wrestling match? I think I might have missed that.
Yeah, so some people lose their temper on the mat, right? And you see this a lot in high school where a kid will just snap because he's in the middle of a tough match, and he'll maybe throw a punch. It doesn't happen that often, but every once in a while it does.
Oh, yeah.
And really, that's a sign of weakness.
Yes.
That's a lack of emotional intelligence. You don't have control over yourself. And on some matches I remember seeing one kid literally get punched by the other wrestler, and he just turned around, went back to the center of the mat, and he was ready to wrestle again. And now that was the kid that I wanted to be. That was cool. It didn't even phase him. It didn't take him out of his game, nothing. Like, he was on point the entire time. And so that's what I mean by politeness. And you'll notice this in the business world, too. If you're able to control yourself and not let things bother you, I mean, sure, you want to get riled up or motivated, but you don't let people take you outside of your game plan.
I love these two, and I can't leave them out because I think they are so important, and they're really important life lessons. Don't overestimate your opponent. Ignore him or her completely. Don't underestimate your opponent. Ignore him or her completely. I mean, shouldn't you know the moves? Shouldn't you study it like chess where you understand what your opponent is bringing at you? I think recently in my life I've realized this, ignore your enemy completely, but shouldn't you know them too, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say try to focus on the skill sets or the moves, but don't focus on the person. A lot of people, they really worry about kind of the persona, and their own persona to a fault sometimes. But if you focus on the results or the actions that are going to be occurring, it can lead you to a much better place and help you get better. Like you might want to learn how to, counteract a certain attack, but you don't need to worry about the person's reputation and get intimidated by it, or their lack of reputation and feel overconfident because of it. I mean, really, you should be spending most of your time focusing on how you can improve and get better and yourself and not what other people are doing.
Excuses make you sad and weak. Save it. No one cares. Keep excuses to yourself. My children, my staff, everyone in my life knows that is my absolute favorite one, number 48 on your list. Excuses make you sad and weak. Save it. No one cares. Keep it to yourself. Blood time is short. This is important advice. Explain that one.
Yeah, you don't have time to, blood time. Blood time is short.
Yes.
Yeah, so in wrestling, you have a certain amount of time. You got 5 minutes if you're bleeding, right? So if you're bleeding from the nose, whatever, you got 5 minutes to clean it up, stop the blood, or the match is over. And in a similar fashion, you have about a minute and a half of injury time. And if that time runs out, guess what? The game's over, you lose. And it's great because in life, it's the exact same way. You either deliver or you go down, and you can start over, of course, but your excuses aren't going to matter. You can't beg the ref for more blood time. You can't beg him for more injury time. You can't say it's not fair. The match is over, you lose. You don't get to go on to state or nationals or whatever goes on to follow. And in business, if you don't close the deal, you don't get to sell. If you don't push yourself and continue to raise yourself to a higher level, it's all on you, and it's nobody else's fault.
Pain is motivation. All growth requires pain. I say things like that so often. I always say nothing in life worth doing is easy. That's sort of one of the mottos. Actually, somebody made a meme of me saying that because I say it so often and repetitively. And no, it wasn't one of my children, although it could have been. But one you say is break yourself. Work hard to break yourself mentally over and over again because you'll always come back stronger and stronger. Is that always true, and is there a point where you are too broken?
That's a good question, and it's pretty deep. Just to give some people some background, so in wrestling we use the phrase a lot, break your opponent. And you want to break them mentally, because people can be in great shape, but if you break them mentally and you throw them out of their game plan, the body's going to go where the head does. They're going to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
And so pushing yourself further and further so that your breaking point, your threshold, is higher and higher is important. And this is also important for life. You got to continue to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to grow. Growth starts outside of your comfort zone. You've probably heard that before. It's very true. So you want to kind of almost seek out chances to fail, seek out things that intimidate you. I kind of like to use intimidation as a kind of a siren letting me know that I absolutely should do that and I need to do that to grow. And so that's what I mean by break yourself over and over. And yeah, obviously I don't mean break yourself, run off a cliff and see if you survive, and if you don't, it'll make you stronger. There's a limit. But as far as pushing yourself to be better, I'm not sure if there is a limit.
Interesting. And I love this one. Get mean. Stop letting people walk all over you. Put people in their place and set some boundaries. But what about being nice? Doesn't that get you somewhere in the boardroom? No?
It does. And I have a couple before that say, be nice. Don't take things so seriously. And that comes back to being emotionally intelligent, too. There are people that are going to try to bait you into conflict, and you have to be able to shrug it off and just be nice. And being nice goes a long way in business. But there are times when people are going to do things that are passive-aggressive. They are going to try to, take your job or maybe take the deal from you, or they're not pulling their weight. And you have to be direct with them, and you have to blast them in a sense and let them know. You don't have to just continue to take it. And really, you have to set these kind of boundaries very early, whether it's with a new job or starting a business. You have to let people know that you have a line that they can't cross, or they will walk all over you.
All right, and last but certainly not least, one I think that is critically important in sports, in business, in life, give back. In high school, your wrestling team gave motivational talks to junior high and so on. Mentoring, important in the workplace. Giving to charity, important in the workplace. Talk about that.
Yeah, and there's a reason that I put that as last on the list. I think there are people that have helped you get to where you are. The first two things I had on the list was that wrestling is an individual sport, and then the second is wrestling is a team sport, because it's very individual, and you have to learn self-reliance, and it is, in a certain respect, all on you. But there are mentors, there are coaches, there are people that teach you things, because if there was nobody to teach you anything, you would never learn. So you have to acknowledge that. And then when it's your turn to give back, when it's your turn to be a mentor or a coach, seize that opportunity, because you'll learn just as much from giving back as other people are going to get from you. So it's really kind of focus on contributing, and you'd be surprised what kind of opportunities that will bring you.
I love it. I really love it, and I really think this is one of the best articles I've ever read in my life as far as just plain, simple, straight up, good, solid life coaching, and I'm really glad that my friend posted that on his Facebook page, and I discovered you. I want to have you back on, because I do want to talk about, you wrote another article called 55 Things Waiting Tables Taught Me About Entrepreneurship, and I want to have you back on for that. We're out of time today, but we will get you back on if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the show. Dr. Isaiah Hankel, you can find him at Isaiah Hankel, and that's HANKEL.com, and also CheekyScientist.com might be the best name of a website ever. You can also find him on Twitter at Isaiah Hankel as well.